Hey, Team 1, you're up.
Ready to go? Okay, so Team 1 to 5, titled our presentation is Gates in Leadership. We were assigned with question 4, which is really 5 separate questions. But we're going to break that down into really 3 parts. So the first 2, how does Gates assign specific tasks to himself, and what key tasks does he take on? We rephrase this as, how does he prioritize? The next 2 questions, how does he exercise these tasks? How does he engage? Really, how does he execute? So, and thirdly, what lessons in these activities are for all social sector leaders? Basically, that summarizes down to broader implications. So, how does he prioritize? How does he execute? What are the broader implications? That's what we'll be answering today.
How does Gates prioritize? So we know that he takes a thoughtful and methodical approach to prioritization. He wanted to establish his brand, which was caring about the troops and making sure that they were safe and they'd get home as soon as possible. He also cared about being open and having integrity, and he did this through his relationships. So we see that he was very focused on mending relationships and building relationships when he was Secretary of Defense. And then our fun term is crowdsourcing. So he knew the importance of, okay, what is the first most important question that I need to ask about the problem in Iraq? And he identified that person that he needed to ask that question to as General or Mr. Petraeus, because he knew that he was the expert. So he knew people and he knew where he needed to go to get answers for big problems in order to get those solutions.
So, how does Robert Gates execute? How does he get things done? First of all, he's responsible for making very tough decisions and still maintaining, still staying within the framework of the strategy. So he needs to make decisions that make him uncomfortable, decisions that keep him up at night, and ultimately a decision that he regretted. Firing Pete Pace to save the surge is what he cited specifically as an example of this principle. He also had a relentless pursuit of his goal. When the bureaucracy of the Department of Defense pushed back against the procurement of MRAPs and against the standardization of response times for the medical evacuation teams, he pushed back against the bureaucracy and was able to achieve those ends through his relentless pursuit of that goal, which of course reflected his values. And finally, he has to be fluid to change. He responds to sort of changing targets in a very politically charged atmosphere. So whether it's acting on new information from the commanders at the battlefronts, or responding to the political pressures from his boss to collaborate with Petraeus on the timing of drawdowns in relation to election cycles. These are examples of things that that he had to do to reflect his fluidity to change, and again, ultimately stay within the strategy of his department.
I'm going to come over here and try to bring out my inner Jarvis and do some hand movements too. So we looked at the broader implications. So the lessons that we worked.
I wish we all had an inner Jarvis.
I mean, she really could lead you down that path. The broader implications, how can we take some of the lessons that we learned from Robert Gates and then use them as our next level leadership? And so we looked at some of the things that he talked to us about. The first one being recognizing pivotal points in an organization. We heard Susan talk about that today too. Pivotal points where you have 4 organizations saying we have very small budgets, a like mission, can we come together? And I would say that recognizing those pivotal points are so important because opportunities will come up or things that challenge you will come up, and if you don't recognize those, you either lose that opportunity or could seriously have implications on your organization. I also like that Gates recognized that time can be an enemy. And again, we heard this today, and I keep referring to Susan, but when she talked about the crisis at their emergency center, time was her enemy. She had to come out with a fast response to that, not only to protect the people that she was helping, but to save the image of the organization. And Gates talked about that a lot, and being able to change the steps and strategy to reach their ultimate goal, especially when he was talking about the 12 months to 15. I mean, time was his enemy. Better a tactical delay than a strategic mistake. This was a big, big piece of what Gates taught us, is that you have to be focused on your ultimate goal. Sometimes you can try something, have a delay tactically, have a failure tactically, recognize it early, and then move on to make sure you don't make a larger strategic mistake. And then finally, being authentic and collaborative. It's one of the things that Gates showed us, not only through his focus on the troops in Walter Reed. He was authentic, he cared about the soldiers. He saw the soldiers as his customers. So if you think about it in terms of who your customers are, those soldiers were his customers. And then being collaborative. He always brought people in. One of my favorite things that he said, he was going to bring Petraeus and Fallon in to meet with the president, and he met with the president first, and what he said was, I was preparing the ground for him. So just like you would prepare the ground for a garden or the foundation for a building, he was preparing the ground because he believed that he should never leave his president in a place where he did not know what to anticipate. So he prepared the ground in any of his discussions, and that's a really important thing for all of us, whether you're dealing with your boards or your staff or your customers, is preparing the ground to let them know not only you're going to do something, but why you're doing that and the impact it's going to have on them.
So what do we want to leave you with today? One, define your priorities, and this can be based on what do you want your brand to be, what are your values, what is the mission. Number two, execute intentionally and adaptively at the same time. Have a sense of purpose, move quickly, but adapt to issues that come up that could be particularly crises or that you don't foresee that require your attention. And then three, the stories kind of Carrie just mentioned about how really all of these can be applied more broadly. So taking Gates specific ideas and using that into your own organizations, I think are highly relevant. And you know, if all that else doesn't work, I think having a really intense stare while sitting next to your colleagues always works super well. So with that, we'll conclude and open up for questions.
Gary, you mentioned time was his enemy. He had that three-pronged approach to buying time. What was your outlook on that?